Hi everyone, that is study 20 from Christopher Parkening's Guitar Method. I'm making this video for some of my students who are working out of this method book, and if you are also working out of that Christopher Parkening Guitar Method, this is a little lesson on study 20. So I just played through the whole piece, and the way I encourage my students to work on it is in sections, so kind of a line at a time. And what I usually do is I tell them to first play the stems down notes. So for the very first line, even though you have this texture where you're going like E, C, F, C, G, C, E, C, etc., the way I want you to do is start by just putting your first finger on the note C. So your first finger on the first fret, second string is on playing the note C. And then while you're holding that, play just the stems down with your thumb. So then that means you're going to play the note E, F, G, E, and that was the first measure. So I would just go through that first line, just playing the stems down. So kind of going through slowly, if I'm counting like, I'm going to count my eighth note, so I'm going to be counting 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and E and F and G and E and F. So I just played through the first line, but I left my first finger down the whole entire time, and I just didn't play that note. And I'm just going to focus on being able to play that line of music. And I'm going to think of that line 1 as being my A idea. So line 1 is kind of, is just like one idea, and that A idea gets repeated in 2 variations. So line 2 is almost identical except for the very last measure. And then line 4 of the piece is almost identical again, except for the very last measure, where that's different. So I'm basically I'm practicing for lines 1, 2, and 4 out of this study number 20. So doing that again, I'm holding down that first finger on the note C, and I'm just playing stems down. So if you've got your guitar, you try it with me, and we're going to go like 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and E and F and G and E, F and A and G and E and G and E and F and A and G, E and D and G. So that's just the first line without the C's, but I'm accounting for it by putting my first finger down on there. And another trick that I use is I take my index finger and I put it on the second string so that I've got it like right here on the second string. And by doing that, I'm accounting for the fact that I'm going to be playing those notes. So after I've done that several times, then I go ahead and fill in the C's. So once I get comfortable and you can kind of play through that first line with all those stems down notes, basically you've learned everything you need for the first line, most of what you need for the second line, and most of what you need for the last line. So when I start filling it in, which would be the next thing I would do, I would then, doing the same thing, I've got my C down, I'm leaving it down, and then I'm going to again count nice and slow. I'm going to play the stems down, keeping my same tempo, but now I'm going to add that C in there with it. So before you even get started, just kind of practice getting like that feel of thumb and index finger. So just get that feel of like 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 1, 2, 3, 4. So trying that with me. 1, 2, 3 and 4 and 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, first two notes of the piece over and over again, just to get that feel of being in time, of like that thumb and then the I finger. So once I start feeling comfortable with that, then I'm going to fill in my moving bass notes with those C's. So now at this point, what you want to do is make sure you're looking ahead to the next note, so that like keep your brain out in front of your hand so that you're not surprised by what that next note is. So I'm going to fill everything in. I'm going 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and E, F, G, E, F, A, G, E, G, E, F, A, G, E, D, G. So that was line 1, and I just filled in like stems down and my note C, which are all the same. But I focused almost all of my work entirely on just making sure I know where I can play the stems down notes. So once I have that first line going, I'm going to go to the second line. And the second line, before I just start into it, I'm just going to skip to the very end, so the very last measure of that second line, because that's the only part that's different. So I'm skipping all the way to the last measure, and in that very last measure, I have the note G, C, then G, B, and E and C together. So I'm just going to isolate that one measure and practice. I had my first finger down on the C, so I'm going to go G, C, G, let go for the B, put the first finger back down, and put the second finger down for the E and the C together. So then I play those two together. So that measure, if I go 3 and 4 and G, C, G, B, E and C together. So do that again. Ready, and G, C, G, B, and E and C together. One last time. Ready, and G, C, G, B, E and C together. So once I've practiced that measure and I'm starting to feel comfortable, then I go from the beginning of the line and I work on that as my new landing point. So now I'm doing the same thing as before. I've got my first finger on the C. I'm focusing on the stems down. First finger's just going to stay down. And again, I'm using thumb and index, so P and I. And I go 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and E, F, G, E, F, A, G, E, G, E, F, A. Now here, G, C, G, B, E, and C together. So I just substituted that last measure. Everything else was the same from the line before. So now I'm going to work that line, just getting that single line to flow all the way through and make sure that I'm anticipating my new ending point. And I'm going to practice that line several times until it starts to feel pretty good. So let's do that again. If I'm going 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and E, F, G, E, F, A, G, E, G, E, F, A, G, G, B, E, and C together. All right, so the other thing that might surprise you by that line is that all of a sudden you have to play two notes together at the end. So that's why most of your effort should be focused on that last measure of getting that G, C, B, G, C, G, B, E, and C together. Okay. Once you've worked that, we're going to come back to it, but we're going to come back to putting those lines together. But going on, I would go on and do the third line. So I'm going to refer to the third line as your B line, meaning it's different from the A line. So my first line, I'm thinking of A. Second line, I'm thinking of as a first variation of A. The fourth line, I'm thinking of as the third variation of A. They all start out exactly the same. They just have different last measures. But the third line is entirely different. So the third line does not have the open B's in it. Does not have the C's in it. It has open B's. So you'll notice in your music, every other note is just a B. So I'm still going to practice through it, just stems down first. So I'm going to go through and only do the stems pointing down. So just my bass notes when I'm playing with a thumb. So in that third line, I'm going ready and D and E and F and G and A and again, just stems down. I'm just focusing on the moving notes. With my right hand, I'm putting I on the B string just to kind of keep my place, and the thumb is going back and forth between the fourth and third strings. So again, I don't need that. I don't need I don't have a C that I had before, so I'm just able to focus entirely on those stems down. So we could do it again. 3 and 4 and D, E and F and G and A and G and F and E and G and F and E, D and D, F and D and G. All right, so after you get comfortable with that, you're gonna practice that a while. Once you start getting comfortable with that, then you will fill in those open Bs with it. So now I'm going to go same tempo, 3 and 4 and D, E, F, G, A, G, F, E, G, F, E, D, F, D, G. All right? One more time. So if I go 3 and 4 and D, E, F, G, A, G, F, E, G, F, E, D, F, D, G. So that third line is completely different from all the other lines. So it might need a little bit more attention because that one's different. You're only going to play it one time. Once you start to get comfortable with that, you're going to go to your last line. And for the last line, the hardest part is the very last measure, which is different. So I want to skip to that very last measure of the last line. So again, this line is an A idea, but just the last measure is different. The very last measure, you're going to have F and D, G and B, and E and C together. And the way I think about that and the way I practice it is I practice just placing the F and the D together. So I place both of these fingers down, play them together, play the next two notes, the G and the B together, and then I play the E and C together. So I'm just practicing that measure and I'm just sort of grouping notes together. So F and D, putting both fingers down at the same time, play them both together with a thumb and index. Next one is the G and B, and watch because most students will often miss it because the thumb goes from the fourth string to the third string. So you're going to be fourth string with the F and D. Now you got to go to the third string, then back to the fourth string. So there's a right hand issue for most students where they get confused somehow going from the fourth and second, third and second, back to the fourth and second. So practice just putting those pairs of notes together. Once you get comfortable with that, then you're going to break them up and play them as written. So now I'm going to go F, D, G, B, C, E and C together. So try that with me. If I go 3 and 4 and F, D, G, B, E and C together. One more time. Ready and I notice I'm starting with both fingers down. Ready and F, D, G, B, E and C together. So after I get that measure down, then I go to the beginning of the line, and again, this A idea should be familiar to you because you've already done it 3 times. So the first 3 measures are exactly the same as first 3 measures of line 1, first 3 measures of line 2, and now you're in line 4. First 3 measures are the same. So I'm going to go through and at this point you should be reasonably comfortable with what that entails. If not, go back to just practicing stems down. But if you're like, okay, I think I'm getting it, then play it exactly as written. So we're going to go like 3 and 4 and E, C, F, C, G, C, E, F, A, G, So that getting into the last measure tends to trip people up. So I'm going to practice it from the measure before to get into it. So the measure before is G, C, E, C, F, C, A, C. Now I gotta get both of these down. F and D, let go, back to E and C. You'll practice just those two measures. G, C, E, C, F, C, A, C. F and D, G and B, and together. So at this point, you focus on each measure, each line by itself, and all your different landing points. And if you have not done so, circle in your music the last measure of every line, because the last measure, the landing points, are different every single time. So you need to just make sure you're aware, okay, it's the last measure is coming up, it's different, and be focused on which one you're doing. So I would practice all the endings by itself, and then finally you can start playing through the whole entire thing. So as you play the whole thing, start super slow. So I'd say about like 1 and 2 and 3. So I've just been using like one kind of slow practice tempo, but you'll notice at the beginning I played the whole piece much faster. Don't worry about how fast you're playing it yet. Just worry about getting it sounding, everything where everything's flowing smoothly. You know exactly what's coming up. You're not tripping up over things. So going from the beginning, I'm going to play through the whole thing, and hopefully you have your guitar. You're going to try it with me. We're going to go 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and E, C, F, C, G, E, F, A, G, E, G, E, F, A, G, E, D, G, E, F, G, E, F, A, G, E, G, E, F, A, G, C, G, B, E, and C together. Now I let go of the first finger. Now I'm on the third line. D, E, F, G, A, G, F, E, G, F, E, D, F, D, G. Now finally the last line. E, F, G, E, F, A, G, F, or E, G, E, F, A, F, D, G, B, E, and C. And you might have noticed when I got to the very end, I slowed down a little bit because having to find two notes at the same time with fingers 3 and 4 can trip people up. So as you approach that very last measure, which you should have practiced a bunch, you need to make sure that you just sort of like navigate your way into that very last measure. So as you're working, you can kind of slowly pick up the tempo. I don't think it needs to go super fast, but somewhere in between 1, 2, 3, 4, 1. That's a reasonably good tempo. That's not super fast. So that's on the slower side. If you want to push it a little bit, maybe about like 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3. And even a little bit faster is okay, but it's not meant to be super fast. You just want to make sure you're thinking ahead, everything's flowing together. I haven't gotten into like how to shape your phrases or anything like that. This video is really just focused on getting all of your notes played and having them sound reasonably good. So I hope that's helpful. Let me know if you have comments. And again, this is Chris Teves, and hope you enjoyed it. All right, thanks. Bye.